I want to talk to you about identifier names, and those are references to memory locations. Identifier names are case sensitive, so for example, my bar is different than my bar with a capital B, and they must follow certain rules. So, for example, they must start with an underscore, a lowercase or an uppercase letter, and they can be followed by any number of underscores, letters, or digits. But they cannot be any reserved words such as none, true, false, and or, and so on. Let me give you some examples of valid identifier names. So for example, my bar is a variable and I want to assign to that the value of 9, and that is a valid variable name. I can also do, for example, name with an underscore, and that would also be a valid name. I can also just include more than a single separator with an underscore. So, for example, name of customer, and that is also a valid identifier name. Now, that doesn't necessarily have to be only for variables. We have identifier names for functions. So, an example with a function is let's say we want to define the function myfunc. That name there is follows the identifier notation that we use, the convention. I mean, again, it can't be any of the reserved words, but that is valid. So, for example, if we want that to return x squared, then we can see that that was valid as an identifier for that particular function. So, for example, if we do 2, then that outputs the squared value of 2. Now, let's see some examples of non-valid identifiers. So, for example, if I start with a number, then that would create an exception in Python telling us that this is invalid syntax. Again, this doesn't have to be for a variable assignment. It can also be for a specific function. So if I don't do that, if I don't start with either a letter or an underscore, that's going to create also an exception. Again, it also happens with other symbols, such as, let's say, backward slash or anything like that. It creates an exception. It also does that when we are assigning those to variables. Now, with that backward slash, let me just talk a little bit about this, because there are some identifiers based on Latex notation symbols that we can use. So, for example, what if we wanted to use the symbol mu, which is used very frequently in statistics as the mean, the true mean? If we do something like that, that is the LaTeX notation for mu. Now, again, if we do something like this, that's going to create an exception, as we mentioned before. But if we, and this is valid for Jupyter notebooks, if we do the tab, you can see that that changes to the Greek letter mu, and that is a valid LaTeX notation. So we can do something like sigma, and that would be also valid. Again, we have to do tab on after finishing up the underscore sigma so that we can get that Greek letter, but that's valid. Again, this is only valid for Jupyter, and you can do that for other cloud services like Google Colab. Getting that, it might be a little bit different, just that instead of clicking on tab, you might have to do control space or something different to get that Greek letter. Now, again, this also works for functions. So, for example, what if we wanted to create let's say, a function and we want to assign it to a Greek letter? So, for example, the logistic function, let's create this. So, what if we wanted to do the logistic function and what we wanted to use the sigma notation, which is common in statistics and also machine learning? So, we could do something like that, sigma, and assign it to the value of x, and then return just 1 over 1, and we might have to use numpy here for this. So let me just define it, import the library. So that's we can see that that's a valid identifier for that function. So we can use sigma of the value of, let's say, 2, and again with the correct notation, and we can use it as a valid function identifier. All right.